Sounds good.
Recorded.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Mike Lopez. I am one of the organizers of the 2023 Big Data Bowl. We are joined today by Kevin Boothe, and this will be a introduction to offensive lineman play, in part to learn about techniques, strategies, goals, the ins and outs of being an offensive lineman. As a little bit of background, this is the 5th ever Big Data Bowl. This is the first one that is focused primarily on offensive linemen. And as an example of why we're doing offensive linemen, traditional NFL stats don't include much about line play. Kevin played several years in the NFL, and because I am a data person, I have to share some of his data. But that included some false starts, some tackles after his team turned the ball over, offensive holding, plays where he reported as eligible. He recovered a couple fumbles, and at one point he was illegally downfield. So, there's not a lot that you look into the NFL play-by-play and say, oh, wow, like, look how good Kevin was. But he was pretty good. And so why don't I introduce him? Kevin played for Cornell University and then with a couple NFL teams, including the Giants and the Raiders. So Kevin, thank you for joining us and being a part of this conversation.
Mike, happy to be here. And yeah, you hit it on the head. I think with offensive line play, usually if you show up in the stats, it's not really a good thing. I think I want to say that most of those were probably due to mishaps by me, including those tackles and fumble recoveries. I figure if you're going to give up a sack or something along those lines, the least you can do is tackle the person who has the ball or get on the fumble. So, I think we had some good fun sharing previous plays where, things might have turned out in a unfavorable fashion for me, but no, very excited to be here. As you mentioned, I played 9 seasons in the NFL. I was drafted by the Oakland Raiders at the time in 2006 in the 6th round and spent a year there, actually started 14 games at right guard. Common with the NFL, things change rapidly as we had a new coaching staff, and ultimately I was released leading into the 2007 season and was claimed by the New York Giants, where I went on to spend 7 seasons, and then in a weird twist of fate, actually went back as a free agent for my final year, back out in Oakland in 2014.
Awesome. Start growing up, when did you start playing football? And then what were some of the, when did you gravitate towards being an offensive lineman, and what positions were you on the line?
Yeah. So, I grew up in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, which is a football rich area. But, I didn't actually start playing tackle football until about 7th grade. And by that point, I think the offensive line and defensive line chose me, just due to my size. So, I played multiple positions. I actually played more defense than I did offense throughout high school. And then I went to Cornell University, where I played offensive line there, playing mostly guard for my first 2 seasons, and then playing right tackle my junior year due to our left-handed quarterback, and then left tackle for my senior year with a right-handed quarterback. And the thought there was kind of that old adage of you put your quote unquote best lineman on the blind side of the quarterback, even though we ran the ball and we're in the top 10 rushing my last year. So in the pros, I actually played multiple positions, mostly at guard, but especially in the first half of my career in the NFL, where I wasn't necessarily a full-time starter, I played a lot of center, guard, tackle, tight end eligible, as you mentioned, as the 6th offensive lineman. So multiple positions, which required me to learn basically what everyone on the offensive line did. And I thought that actually prolonged my career, being able to have that thorough understanding of not only the offensive line play, but then also what everyone else is doing, including the running backs and the tight ends.
Great. And then that probably that knowledge has maybe helped you a little bit translate into the NFL league office. You want to just give maybe a high-level overview of some of the positions you've had at the league office for the last couple of years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've been in the league office now for about 6 years, and actually started as an intern in sponsorship, but then moved over into football operations, where I held multiple roles, including a strategy group where we looked at how football would grow 5, 10 years from now, both on the field as well as off the field when you're talking about technological advances or partnerships throughout the league. And then in the football development world, where we focus specifically on the combine area in terms of how we can modernize the combine, as well as our partnership with college all-star games. And then recently, within the past year, I've moved over to the NFL Management Council, where I've focused my efforts mostly on salary cap items, contracts, as well as work rules, all within the umbrella of the CBA. So working closely with the Players Association, as well as providing that service to all of our clubs.
Awesome. Kevin, also a former assistant at one of the big data bowls, maybe the 2020 version. Data friendly, one of my favorite people to work with at the league. So really excited to talk lineman play. So we're gonna get into a bunch of different plays in the next 30 or 40 minutes. Kevin's idea was to split our sort of dive into 3 different types of strategies from the line. And we'll walk through what each of those strategies are. But I think as a high level for folks that are participating in the Big Data Bowl this year, there's something to be said for the idea that there are lineman strategies that don't show up in the data. They're not in our data that we share. They're not in the play-by-play data. And really, you have to sort of look to see at the XY coordinates or at the video to understand why a team would be in a certain formation. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen here. And we're going to start with a clip of, let's see here. You can't see it yet. Hold on a sec. All right, here we go. Okay, so just going through some strategy. This is a 2022 game between the Chargers and the Raiders. So Kevin, at least before we even get into what this scheme is, and this scheme is we're going to label as man duel. But when you look at this defensive set from the Raiders, and you can see what the 5 Chargers offensive linemen are facing, what are some of the things that stand out here?
Yeah, I think the key thing here is just the alignment of the defense. This is a traditional quote unquote sub defense versus a 3 wide receiver set. So if you look at the Chargers offensive front, they have their tight end. It's tough nowadays with the number restrictions being loosened, but number 7 there is actually a tight end. And then obviously they have their 5 offensive linemen, their 1 running back, number 30. And then those wide receivers that you don't see off the screen. There's actually 2 wide receivers to the right outside of number 7 and 1 to the left of the left tackle. So what we call this in football terminology is a 3-by-1. And when you hear 3-by-1, that means 3 wide receivers or 3 eligible targets to one side versus 1 to the other, the 1 wide receiver to the left in this case. And a common offensive line pass protection is to basically slide to the strong side, in this case to the right. And the thought there is that there are going to be more bodies or more potential blitzers or rushers to the right side than there are to the left side. And ultimately, you give yourself the best chance to have your best blockers, the offensive linemen, on their best rushers. And hopefully, if that works out, you're able to get the running back out on a pass route.
So let's run through this one time, and then we'll sort of return to the start just to see what happens. So when you say that there are 3 wide receivers, you can kind of see another one coming in over here. Mm-hmm. Herbert drops back, and it looks like the Raiders do a little bit of a stunt.
Yeah. And they kind of fall into it, and that's typically how this goes. But from an offensive line standpoint, everything kind of starts with a designation. And 9 times out of 10, it's who the middle linebacker or who the key is. And that basically sets where the protection is going to go. And that will determine where everyone's going. And also it gets everybody on the same page. It's something that the quarterback, running back, offensive line, and even the tight end in some cases, and in other cases, the wide receiver understands who's being accounted for and who isn't. And the reason why that's important is there are different items built into every play where if a certain player blitzes or if multiple players blitz, that can lead to different route conversions by the wide receiver. So basically having everyone on the same page. There's an understanding of, I know who's accounted for and who isn't. And in this case, versus a 3-by-1 look, what typically happens here, and my guess is that the center or the quarterback, Herbert in this case, made the linebacker over the right tackle the point or the key or the mic or whatever they want to call it. And in this type of protection, what basically that dictates is that the center and the right guard and the right tackle will be responsible for the 2 defensive linemen up to that linebacker. And if that linebacker doesn't blitz, anything else to the right side, to the strong side in this case, they'll pick up. So they have the first 3. And then the left side will have the 2 defensive tackles, the defensive tackle and defensive end to the left side. And then the running back is now responsible for anything to the weak side, where in this case, it's that linebacker number 5 out to that defensive back that's looming out there.
Got it. So part of this is that when the Chargers get to the line of scrimmage, they might not necessarily know who they're going to have until they see where the Raiders line up.
That's exactly correct.
All
so
right,
in this
so now,
picture, this is ideal because you don't get too exotic of a look. You get a straight 4-man rush. You can see the offensive line, the center's looking at the, let's call him the Mike, looking at the Mike linebacker, the middle, number 50. He doesn't see him rushing. So now he can help out his buddies inside and shore up the pocket so that Herbert can step up. And then you'll see Eckler, he checks both of his weak side threats. Neither are coming, and he's not in a position to help, or they didn't ask for help for their left tackle. So now he's out in the pass route.
Got it. So lots going on. And one of the things that ends up being a little bit simpler is that, at least from an evaluation standpoint, 70, the left tackle, is primarily responsible for the defensive end. He's not getting help. And so it's basically a one-on-one block. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I will say this too. Defenses are very smart. And the thing is about offensive line play is that there are only so many different types of protections. In this case, most times with a 3-by-1 set, the offensive line is sliding to the right. And what happens is when you have a crafty veteran such as Chandler Jones over here on the left tackle, the defensive end, number 55, he knows that number 70 is by himself. And the only potential help he might get is from the running back, Eckler. So that will then ultimately start to show up later in the game because he knows that this is a one-on-one matchup. And that's why it goes back to why the left tackles are such a premium, because they're viewed as not having much help in these regards.
So if we want to walk through the technique of some of the line play, I don't know if we'll do it every play, but let's do it on this one, just because we're starting. So, a couple things. If you look at their stances to start, each of the linemen, their inside foot is up and their outside foot is back.
Yeah.
And then from an orientation standpoint, and I'm trying to think of like the coordinates of the big data bowl, they're almost pointed outwards. And is that something that your line coaches teach you? How do you get to that type of stance?
Yeah. And you know what, usually the way it's, taught is that the center will be in a more of a balanced stance, obviously, because he has to be able to go left or right. And then depending on which side you are, ideally you want your inside foot up. And the thought there is that if you get beat or if you have to give up pressure, you'd rather give it up to the outside and not the inside. And the reason why is because you want to form a pocket for the quarterback. You hear that term all the time. And what they're essentially referring to is a bowed protection. So ideally that center and the 2 guards are able to keep their linemen up the field, whereas the left tackle and the right tackle will keep their edge rushers to the outside. So ultimately what that allows is that the quarterback is then able to step up into the pocket and see the field and be able to deliver the ball. So ideally you want to force the protection, the pass rushers to the outside. You want to form almost like a shield, if you will, in front of the quarterback.
Yeah, makes sense. Let's run this one more time through. And if there's anything else you want to call out in terms of technique or performance, feel free to do that.
I think the key thing here is also noticing that the center he technically doesn't have a responsibility there. So once he sees his person drop, he'll then, you see him leave that left hand there to assure the left guard that he has some help there. And I think if the left guard's in film the day after, his O-line coach is going to tell him, hey, shut off that inside rush there and not give up so much color, so that the quarterback doesn't see that white jersey poking through there and anticipate that he's going to provide some pressure. But I thought the center does a good job of sitting in there, taking up space, quite frankly, because that discourages the defensive tackle from coming inside and then going over and helping his right guard late.
Yep. Pretty good move from the left defensive end from the Raiders.
Yes.
Sort of gets inside here.
Yes.
But the benefit of sliding the group to the right here is that now there's other people here.
Right. And you're able to just kind of muddy everything up. And sometimes it's a called twist by the defensive line, and other times they just kind of fall into it. And obviously the Raiders have two elite rushers on the outside that probably have a lot of leeway in terms of how they can get to the quarterback.
Awesome. All right, we're going to close out of this one and go, let's see. So this is now the Raiders are on offense against the Chiefs. Explain what you're seeing here to start this play.
Not too different than the previous example. So you see 4 down linemen there, and obviously they can line up in different fashions, but you can see the 4 defensive linemen. And in this case, the tight end is to the right. And for the audience, this is still a 3-by-1 set. So basically the center will make number 32 there, who's floating over the right guard as kind of the mic or the key or the point. So that means now the right side of the line, including the center, are going to slide to the right. And you'll see Derek Carr actually point to number 47 there. And what he's doing there is telling his running back, Josh Jacobs, hey, that's your guy. That's that will linebacker. That's that weak side starting point for you. So you're going to have number 47 all the way out. So if 47 blitzes, Josh Jacobs will pick him up, and he actually does blitz on this play. You can see what you're doing here is getting everybody on the same page, and the receivers know when they see that pressure that it's accounted for, so they can continue running their routes, and they don't have to make any of those adjustments that they might have talked throughout the course of the week. They actually have a pretty good pocket there, as you can see.
Right.
The left tackle, the running back actually does a great job of stepping up and taking on the weak side linebacker, because what you ultimately don't want is the running back to sit back and wait for 47 to get into the pocket. And that'll just create confusion, and it'll also muddy the waters for the quarterback there.
Yeah, this is impressive. I mean, they rushed 6.
Yep. And you have 6 people to block 6. Yep. As you can see, that middle linebacker actually does blitz, and the center and the right guard are able to pass that off and communicate, because the right side is all looking at number 32 to make sure that he blitzes. And now the right tackle, 72, he, under normal circumstances, will expect some help from 64. But in this case, if he sees that inside linebacker is blitzing, he now knows that he's by himself on the defensive end, in this case, the left defensive end, but the right for the offensive line. So if 32 did not blitz, he knows that 64 is there to help him on the inside, and that might affect his technique going out there to block the defensive end.
So 2 plays in 2 pretty solid pockets, right?
Correct. Yep, that's ideal for a quarterback. You ask any quarterback, that's what they would want.
Awesome. So let's go to, it's not going to be all fun and games to be honest.
Right. If only they could be so easy. And this is actually a great look at what teams will typically do here. And in this case, this one is a 3-by-1 as well, but it's to the field. So the 3 wide receivers in this case are to the left, the running backs to the right, and then there's one other wide receiver to the right. So in this case, if you took those 2, what we call as mugged linebackers or walked up linebackers, if you took them back, if they stepped back 3 yards, it would look very similar to the look that we had on the first 2 clips. But because we said, hey, that was pretty straightforward, pretty easy, this has been an adjustment by teams that typically have 2 linebackers in the game or in a 4-2-5 look. So what they'll do here is they'll walk up that middle 2 linebackers. So in this case, the running back technically has number 7 in this picture. And the offensive line, the left side of the offensive line will have that, I believe it's number 48 or number 40 something to the left over the left guard. But then they also have anything else that might come out to the edge on the left. Does that make sense? So this is a way
So
to
if
kind of cheat the
40,
protection.
49 were to drop back and they were to send somebody else,
Right.
these three guys would all have to get wide. Yeah.
Right. And that's what makes it very difficult. And the defenses, like I said, defenses are smart. Defensive coordinators watch a lot of film. They're saying, hey, how can we bring pressure without having to, blitz 7 people? We know there are 6 blockers there. So how can we bring under 7 people and still get pressure? So this is one adjustment that they'll make, is that they'll walk these 2 linebackers up. And if you can't see it, but the guy on the nickel out here on the left, he's actually walked up as well in a blitz posture right outside. So basically you have 7 people who could potentially rush. And let's see how this plays out.
Yeah, here's number 8 coming in, right? Yeah.
Right. So if you look at it, the left side of the offensive line actually does a pretty good job here, whereas the center takes the first linebacker, the left guard takes the defensive end, the defensive tackle, sorry, and then the left tackle sees the outside rusher, so he kicks all the way out. And now if you look at the running back, he is tracking his middle linebacker there, his inside linebacker, number 7, sees him drop, so now he's put in a bind, because his normal rules will say, hey, I'm supposed to be out. My guy dropped, but he sees this defensive end floating in on the twist. And then the right guard is supposed to block his man, but his man drops. So you can see this is essentially a beater to this protection. And every team will have a different rule in terms of how they want to adjust this, or how they want to adjust to this. But it's not easy. It's not easy, as you can see. They actually block this about as well as you can by having that running back step up and be willing to take on a defensive end. Now, that's a once in a half type of adjustment that you'd like your running back to take. You don't want that to happen every time you line up in this formation. So teams on the offensive side will game plan for this to account for those twists, and sometimes it turns into a chess type of matchup where you don't know what the defense is going to do, you don't know what the offense is going to do. So they actually did a pretty good job of this outside of the hold.
Yeah, everything's good until right there.
Right there. And it also helps having Kyler Murray as your quarterback to buy some time.
Yeah.
But some of the adjustments that you'll see, Mike, if you run this back, what some teams will do to eliminate this or to try to help this out is they'll actually adjust and move their running back up right in that gap before the snap. And that'll just help shore everything up closer to the line of scrimmage rather than having the running back run from depth. That's one adjustment. Another adjustment is they'll bring the whole line down to the left. So 68, the right tackle, will block down, and everyone will block to the left, take their gap to the left. And then the running back, number 6, will block the defensive end on the edge. And typically you'll see that if it's a quick timing pattern where it's a 3-step drop, because they know under ideal circumstances, you don't want your defensive end, you don't want your running back trying to block your defensive end over and over again.
Yep.
Those are a couple of adjustments that you can make to this.
Are most of these communicated in the huddle when the play is called, or are they communicated at the line of scrimmage?
In this case, it's usually communicated at the line of scrimmage, but if a team has shown this, it's in the game plan. So the Cardinals have talked through, hey, if we run this type of protection and they walk up in that double mug, this is going to be our adjustments. There might be a code word, there might be some sort of adjustment on the offensive line, or the quarterback comes up and tells the offensive line and the running back that this is going to be how we're going to adjust to this look.
Yep.
Looks like there's not much confusion. They knew who they had to block. It's just a matter of how it all played out in the execution of it.
Yep. Maybe another hold here from the 64, maybe
64. Yeah. But that's the goal of the defense, right? To them, that's a win, is to just get confusion on the offensive line, chaos, just to muddy up the picture for the quarterback. And ideally, you get a holding or a sack or an errant pass.
Yep. Pretty good job by the right tackle here, one-on-one.
Yes, and that's a great rusher. And that's another situation where that rusher knows that he is one-on-one with that offensive lineman, that there will be no help out there. just due to the pressure that's being called.
All
The
right.
key thing there is that you notice how many people they rushed on that play. They only rushed about, I think it was 5. They brought 5 people, and it was
But
chaos, right?
it felt like more.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think maybe we'll do one more of these schemes.
Yeah. And this is
So this
great
is,
too, because it
yeah,
gives you another look at it. And this is the Rams obviously against the Cowboys, and this is another 3-by-1 set where the tight end is to the right, so there are 2 other wide receivers out there to the right, as well as 1 wide receiver to the left. And this is another adjustment that teams can do to this look from an offense, is essentially cover up the offensive lineman. So if you look at it, the Rams have 5 people lined up over the 5 offensive linemen. And typically what happens in this situation is you do, from an offensive standpoint, you'll put your big guys on their big guys. So it looks like it's pretty easy in terms of who the offensive lineman will have to block. And essentially the rule for the running back in that case is he has anybody else who blitzes. So whether that's number 45, Bobby Wagner, or anybody else from either side. And typically teams will call that a scan type of protection for the running back, or the running back has the roof. There's different terms, which means basically anything that pressures outside of those first 5 is the running backs. And typically what you get out of this look is either outside pressure from someone other than the linebacker, number 45, or you get twists up front with the defensive line, because they know that the offensive line has to block their 5. So typically, instead of rushing straight, you'll then start to see twists and things of that nature. Oh,
so someone's unaccounted for here.
Yep. And the goal here is to obviously create communication errors. I think that's the first thing that teams will typically do. So in this case, the running back obviously didn't hear his responsibility, or he misunderstood his responsibility. It looks as though he thought he only had number 45, but you can see the offensive line is adjusting to their 5 guys, but he does not see, he being the running back, does not see the blitzing nickel, who's Ramsey in this case. And that leads to a sack, and I think a fumble as well, maybe. So the goal of this obviously is to, 1, isolate the offensive line one-on-one with your best rushers, and then also put your running back in a bind where he's looking all over the field to find out if somebody else is blitzing. And that's why communication's key during these situations, because one play you can come out with 4 defensive linemen, you can come out with 3 defensive linemen, and then the next you can come out with 5 in this case, where you count 5 rushers for your 5 offensive linemen.
Yep. So one of the things that does stand out on this play too is, and maybe this is part of the reason the running back moves up, is I believe that the defensive right tackle is Aaron Donald.
Yes.
And so potentially more eyeballs on getting help on a player like that.
Yep. And that's very true. That's, my guess is it's probably a game plan adjustment that, if for the running backs, if if your guy does not blitz, your eyes go to wherever number 99 is lined up, and it looks as though 20 thinks that his linebacker is 45 and that's it, so he's looking to help inside, which is obviously the right thing to do under normal circumstances.
Yep. So it brings up a possible question for you, thinking back to when you played. Who were some of the best defensive tackles or defensive ends that you faced? In a sense, in one sense, like, who were they, but also what made them good? And then how did you have to change your strategy when playing a player like that?
Wow. I think some of the few that come to mind, I think just even watching and mentioning Aaron Donald and his body size, the first person that I think of is Geno Atkins, a longtime Cincinnati Bengal, similar body type, very strong, very quick, and could rush the passer. And, I think back to whenever we played him and we would line up in these 3-by-1 sets, he would switch sides to go to the weak side, so that he knew that chances were higher that he would be one-on-one. And unfortunately, I was on the wrong end of a couple of those pass rushes. I'm sure you can probably dig those up, but just seeing that, knowing that he studied the game plan. He understood what the protections would typically look like and how he would align himself in a position to affect the game. He was probably one of the toughest interior guys to block, especially in a known passing situation. And then in terms of the edge rushers, I feel as though usually your toughest opponents are the ones who you see all the time. And in this case, I think of DeMarcus Ware, because he's somebody who not only is a Hall of Fame talent, but he also played in our division. So he knew all of our strengths, all of our weaknesses. He knew all of our tendencies in terms of play calls. So he would then put himself in a position to succeed. So having somebody who's so familiar with not only your personnel, but also your playbook can make things very challenging. And then on top of that, he's an elite pass rusher.
Yep. Yep. Interesting. One of the things that stands out for Donald on this play, and just thinking about the data from the Big Data Bowl and the tracking data, is how quickly, even though he's going to eventually get help, the left guard is eventually going to get help from 20, is how quickly Donald can sort of turn this guy's shoulders right here.
Yeah.
You can almost sort of just see his strength, and Donald is like, look how low Donald's legs are. And he's basically, even though he's getting help from Pollard, if Pollard wasn't there, you almost feel like 66 would end up on the ground.
Yes.
Because of how the sort of strength of Donald to get underneath.
Yeah. Yeah. It's that strength and quickness. I think how quickly he engages with the offensive line as well. I think that's something that is very unique and something that you don't see too often, because he's lined up he's not lined up right over number 66, but he engages with him very quickly, even before 66 is able to establish himself. So it's one of those things that makes him, one of the best who have ever done it.
Yep. Awesome. I think maybe we'll go to slide protections next.
Yep. Yeah.
So
slide protections, it's basically a relative of that man protection. It's basically taking the slide away from the strength or away from the tight end. And the reason why is just, to me, it's more of a break in tendency. And typically what you'll see in a formation with a slide protection is 2x2. So whereas the slide strong or that man protection, that dual read, typically went with a 3x1, this typically goes with a 2x2. So imagine if the tight end in this case were let's say to the left, and then he has one wide receiver out there to the left, and then you have two other wide receivers to the right. So you have a quote unquote balanced look. What you can do there is it gives you a little bit more options, because you can typically slide to the tight end or you can slide away. So it makes things a little bit more hairy for the defensive front, and maybe you can slide protections to a certain individual. So in this case, it's a 2x2 look, and everybody is going to slide to the right or to the weak side in this case, away from the tight end. So what typically happens is the offensive line will have the 4 defensive linemen as well as the will linebacker or the weak linebacker. In this case, the Giants are in a 3-down look. So typically what would happen is the quarterback might point out the 2 other people that the offensive line are responsible for. In this case, it appears to be the person over the right guard, as well as number 36 there with the red gloves, who's backpedaling. So you can see the 4 offensive linemen starting at the left guard all the way through the right tackle are responsible for the 2 defensive linemen, as well as those 2 linebackers. And then in this case, the left tackle is going to be by himself with the running back responsible for anything strong in this protection. So basically it's the flip responsibilities of the man dual protection, or that strong side protection. So you'll see the running back, he has his eyes over there on that linebacker, and he's sliding over there.
Yep. So one of the things that's quite possible here is it looks like, the quarterback sees 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 possible rushers.
Yeah.
The offensive line ends up doing a pretty decent job, all things considered. And there's clearly could be a pocket to step up in.
Yeah.
But maybe worrying about that pressure, throw is kind of a tough pass to hit.
Right. Yeah. You look at that. If he
maybe
waits one more second, he's either running or that receiver running the in right there. Yeah. But once again, this isn't even considered a blitz, right? I mean, they rushed 4 people, so they have 7 people back in coverage there. but they've caused enough disruption by blitzing a linebacker or by spreading the offensive line thin, by walking those linebackers up. If those linebackers were back 5 yards depth, they're able to keep that pocket integrity, especially in the interior there, and it probably gives Tannehill some more comfort in terms of standing in there and delivering the ball.
Yeah. So two related ideas then that folks could look at this year would be, one, just what are the differences between teams, D coordinators, and how they rush the same number of people. So one team could line up 4 defenders, 1, 2, 3, 4, and just rush those defenders. That's 4 people rushing. Another team could line up 6 and then, get this really funky look where you got basically 4 linemen responsible for 2, and then 2-on-2 on the other side. And that level of difference, if you were to look at number of rushers, you would see 4, but this is quite a different way to get to that 4.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the whole point of it, is to kind of spread the offensive line thin and to create different levels in terms of disruption there. So I thought that the Giants' left side there did enough work of causing a little bit of issue there with the receiver and the quarterback.
A pro Giants opinion, no surprise.
Well, their defensive coordinator, Wink Martindale, he comes from that tree of exotic looks where it's very rare that you'll see a traditional 4 defensive lineman rush. I think the whole key there is to test an offensive line's communication as well as identification. Do you understand that there are now only 2 real defensive linemen on the field, and how do you plan to block them?
Yep.
So heading into our next slide here, this one looks a little bit more traditional because you'll see the 4 defensive linemen. But what they have here is basically a slide to the weak side. So actually the center and the quarterback determine that number 6 is going to be the middle linebacker, and it's going to be the running back's responsibility. And the offensive line is actually working out towards the will linebacker, who is off the screen here. Probably that number 22 that you kind of see as the clip plays on. So in this case, the running back's rules are the middle linebacker to anything strong. But as you play this out, you'll see this middle linebacker actually blitzes as well as a safety. So basically it's 2 for 1. So the running back can only take 1 person, and that means the ball has to come out now. The thing here is obviously Tua recognizes it and the ball comes out quickly. And if he didn't call it, there's probably some sort of adjustment there for the wide receiver to get the ball out quicker.
Well, so this is almost like, from Baltimore's perspective, it's almost a perfect pass rush, right?
Yes.
They kind of get away by having 2 people over here, but the 4 of them have slid over.
Mm-hmm.
They have two rushing with only a running back to pick up. But this is just, good offense beats good defense here.
Yes. And what you've seen here is, we don't know the circumstances, but the play clock might have been running down. Obviously, Baltimore does a good job of disguising it with the safety coming down late and the linebacker moving over late. But ideally, under a perfect situation, what would happen typically with an offense is that once this starts to show itself, or maybe there's a hard count and they're able to diagnose that this pressure is coming, the quarterback will then redirect the protection. He'll say, actually, you know what, running back, you're now responsible for number 14. Let's make him the middle linebacker, the Mike in this case, out to the strong side linebacker, in this case, number 36, I believe, to the right. And offensive line, you're now taking the new will linebacker, who's now number 6, right over your face. So it's a way to kind of cheat your assignments in order to pick up this protection. So imagine in this case, if now the line is working to number 6 and the running back has number 14 to number 36, it then gets protected, and then ultimately Tua will have more time to deliver a ball even further down the field.
Yep. Excellent. I think one of the things that's really hard about line play is that, depending on what Tua did, it could have led to different definitions of performance, right? So did you give up a pressure? Did the line, what did the pocket look like?
Right.
The longer Tua holds on to the ball, the more likely it is that somebody's right in his face. And, the ability of a quarterback and untangling that from how well the line did is really tricky.
Yeah, and what you'll see a lot of times too, especially with veteran quarterbacks, when you see that hard count, and then you see the quarterback maybe come up to the line and repoint to the offensive line to say, "Hey, actually, I see what's happening here." And I think Peyton Manning was probably one of the best ever, if not the best ever, at doing this. And Eli is actually right there with him, is being able to diagnose these pressures just based off of how the rotation of the safeties were, transpiring before his eyes. So being able to go up and redirect the protection to in order to protect yourself, to buy yourself some more time, and to put your best blockers on their rushers gives your offense the best chance to succeed. But once again, this is a game on the road. Who knows what the play clock situation is? And Tua and the Dolphins understand that they have two very fast wide receivers out there. They figured that they would get down the field before the pressure gets there.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of the play clock angle. I don't think we include that, but maybe we can look into adding that, because I do think, certainly the get off speed for defenders is probably a little higher when the clock is ticking down.
Yeah, and I mean, from an offensive line standpoint, based on what it looks like the protection was called, they did everything right in this situation, but there was still an unblocked defender here.
Excellent. Why don't we do one more slide protection? We have a couple in here. We sort of 4, 5, 6, and 7. Any of these, Kev, that you know off the top of your head you'd want to show? This is a New Orleans Cincy. This is Chargers
You know what?
Chiefs.
Let's let's go with the Dallas LA clip. Or
Is it
actually,
this
let's
one?
go with the New England Pittsburgh, sorry. As I tricked you there.
There we go.
So this is actually a very, very good one, and I'll let it play out first, and you can see how teams can actually only rush 5 people and still be effective. So in this case, it's still that slide protection. They're sliding weak. So in this case, you're going to have to trust me that the strength is to the right. So they're sliding to the left. And by they, I mean the offensive line. So
Yeah,
the
you can see
offensive line in this
78,
case, yep, it's a
61, 69.
4-2-5. So the center is sliding to the left to number 8. And the running back is now responsible for the strong side, the middle linebacker out to the strong side. So in this case, it's number 48. So from an offensive line standpoint, you'll see number 8 actually twists around, whereas number 48 is blitzing. So the running back does a good job of meeting number 48 in the line of scrimmage, but 48 ultimately wins and gets the sack. But from a pass protection standpoint, the center and the left guard, and actually the right guard in this case, you can see it turns into a twist of some sort, and they actually lost track of their defender there. So there's obviously a lot of communication going on. And even during the play, that's one of the things in the offensive line play. If you ever hear those mic'd up situations, there's usually a lot of yelling and screaming and grunting, and that's usually communication to pass something off within the line. And it looks as though they knew who to block. It's just the actual execution of it was not ideal.
Yeah, kind of a funky game from the defense here.
Yeah. And what you'll see here, actually, number 8, he's not blitzing, honestly. Number 8 is actually tracking the running back in this case. And then if the running back blocks, he would then add on and blitz. But he's actually just mirroring the running back in this situation. 48 is the blitzer.
Interesting. So it
So
looks like,
yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say, just from the defensive scheme here, it looks like this D tackle kind of takes out the center, and then this D tackle kind of goes around him and then meets the quarterback.
Yep. And the thought there is knowing that the pressure is coming from the right side. That twist is a common game that you'll see defensive linemen play because they want to tie up that interior and create that isolation with the running back on the linebacker.
And this is the type of thing
If it's a
too,
straight
where
rush, there's a better chance that somebody will be able to help the running back in that situation.
yeah. So it's just sort of comparing this to the last play. One of the reasons that, again, the quarterback is such a critical part of it is, if the quarterback releases it, like let's say now, which would be about 2 seconds, the ball comes out now, the defense doesn't register a pressure here, right? It's, in the world of statistics, this would be like right censored, right? The play doesn't exist anymore. You don't know if a pressure would develop. But the quarterback holds on to the ball. Now you got really 2 pressures and then a sack.
Right.
All that happens almost within half a second.
Right, things can change pretty quickly. I mean, if the left guard keeps this picture clean, maybe the quarterback has an extra tick to get the ball out. And then on the other side, or if the running back was able to be successful in that block, then maybe the missed twist doesn't play as big of a role in flushing the quarterback to the right side. So it's one of those key things how everything has to work together there as an offensive line and running back.
And even both the left tackle and the right tackle for Pittsburgh do a very good job here.
Yeah,
They're
yeah, they actually did a very good job of keeping that pocket integrity from a width standpoint. But where the issue came was on the interior here in terms of that depth. The quarterback wants to ideally be able to step up in this situation and deliver the ball.
All right, last one, we're going to go to what we'll call empty.
Yep.
So describe when you're terming it empty, what does that refer to?
Yeah, empty as it sounds means there's no running back in the backfield. So basically, it's just a quarterback out there, and that there are 5 eligible wide receivers up towards the line of scrimmage. So whether that's running backs or tight ends or whoever the case may be joining the wide receivers, the quarterback's by himself. And from an offensive line standpoint, that means basically you have everyone, right? Obviously, there's only 5 offensive linemen, but what would typically happen is the quarterback will direct the offensive lineman in some direction if there are fewer than 5 rushers up on the line of scrimmage. If there are 5 rushers on the line of scrimmage, usually the quarterback will then just say, hey, you have those 5. And then if anything else runs through, it turns into a most dangerous situation. So, which can then create some unique circumstances. And from a defensive standpoint, the key to empty is that it makes a defense show its hand, so to speak, because there's only so much you can do with so many receiving threats out on the line of scrimmage. If you bring a running back into the backfield here, you can start to get some disguises. You can have number 30 walk up into the middle of the line of scrimmage. He can float anywhere, but now with no help back there, he has to actually get to his responsibility if he has to cover Waller in this case. The high alert for offensive line play against an empty protection is that there's going to be some sort of twist 9 times out of 10. So whenever you see empty, because everybody's so worried about the quick passes or passes in general, because there's no real run threat outside of a quarterback draw, you'll see a lot of twists as a way to generate pressure rather than blitzing people. Because if you're blitzing, chances are somebody's wide open versus empty. So in this case, you have 5 available rushers walked up, even though 47 is a linebacker. My guess is they communicated amongst the offensive line and the quarterback that we have those 5. And you see there's the twist on the interior. You see the left guard and the center actually do a good job of passing that twist off.
Yeah, you can almost see the left guard here with his right hand out.
Yeah, that's actually, that's very well done. And that's usually the key. If you see a linebacker walk up, you've got to, as an offensive lineman, that was always a red flag whenever you saw somebody walk up, whether it was a linebacker or a defensive back. So anticipating that there would be some sort of twist and being able to pass it off as quick as possible. He did a great job of putting out his post hand, is what we would call it.
Yep. On the other hand, the lefty tackle on the offense's right side for Denver does a pretty good job of getting depth here.
Yeah, and what he's done here is that he understands that guards typically don't like to play in space or haven't had much experience playing in space. So if you look at his alignment before the snap, he's lined up on the right tackle. So he's a lot wider than normal. And the thought there is to get the right guard to be uncomfortable and to do things that he normally wouldn't do so that he's able to either beat him up the field, or if the right guard were to jump out too far, go underneath and get pressure on the quarterback that way. So in this case, they're probably okay with a quarterback scramble. They felt pretty confident that Derek Carr in this situation wouldn't just tuck the ball and run. So that gives them more liberties to get a little wider and to generate their best pass rush moves.
Right. You wonder if a team would do this against Kyler Murray, because otherwise you sort of have this huge lane sitting right
Right,
for you.
right. I think typically against a lot of scrambling teams, what you'll see is that walked up linebacker might actually turn into a spy of some sort, and he'll actually float to the middle of the field and then mirror the quarterback.
Yep. Excellent. All right, let's do this one next.
So
So here
here you
we have
go.
another empty look from
Yep.
the Jets.
So empty. You see 4 defensive linemen. You see that 1 linebacker walked up. Seems pretty clear in terms of who the 5 linemen will block. But as I mentioned in the last clip, red flag whenever you see a linebacker walk up on the line of scrimmage. Now, in this case, he bails, but then there goes the twist that you typically see.
So you got a twist, and then you're sending somebody from the edge that you can't even see in the picture.
Right, right. And in this case, it's every man that blitzes. So in this case, they only brought 5 rushers. So typically the offensive lineman would take those 5. But as I mentioned in the previous clip, if it's a true 4-down look, the quarterback's giving them some sort of directional call. And in this case, it's to the field. So the offensive linemen know that, hey, if 55, I believe that is over the center, if he were to rush, we have those 5, and anybody else who pressures, that's on the quarterback. But with this player now bailing over the center, they're now going back to their original rules, which is saying, hey, we're sliding to the right or sliding to a certain number. And they were able to actually get out there. And it looks as though the quarterback maybe wasn't quite sure that the right tackle saw this player, and he speeds up his throw, or maybe it was that pressure on the interior there that led to the errant throw.
It's interesting. This guard frees up and tries to help, but they still
Tries
get
to help,
pressured.
yeah. The center,
So,
the center probably could have done a better job here of taking on that color. But they only rushed 4 people, and they got to the quarterback. So you can see if he has a second there, you see the running back, number 25, after he gets out into the backfield. Even that pass right there with him running in the opposite direction of the dropping defensive end, I like my running back's chances there running across the field.
just should I point out, if you just track this linebacker 55,
Yes.
I mean, this is just an incredible play.
It's amazing, right? Yep, that's a typical cover 2 type of Tampa 2 type of look where that middle linebacker has to get back. And it gets a little misleading because you're thinking that the middle of the field is going to be open, but you have to have special athletes at middle linebacker to be able to make this play.
All right, we'll do a couple more out of empty.
Okay, here you go with empty. And then now you see the 5 rushers. And I will point out the guy over the tight end is a DB or a linebacker body type. So from an offensive line standpoint, you have to assume that he's covering the tight end. Not every time, but that the left tackle will then kick out to the defensive end. So if you take that guy out of the mix, you have 5 obvious rushing threats for the offensive line. And then the quarterback would have everything else. And then what do you get? You get twists on the inside.
Yep. And what's hard about this twist is, like, a second to the play, it doesn't look like a twist.
Right. They did a great job of selling this, right? When by the nose acting like he's going to the offense's right and then coming back to the left. That's a great job by him to set the pass rush up so that he's able to free up there on the twist.
And here the Jets quarterback gets rid of the ball right at about 2, maybe 2.5. So it's hard to tell if this would be defined as a pressure or a win for the Dolphins, but clearly, if the receiver wasn't open or if Wilson held onto the ball, he's in tough shape here.
Yeah. And then with that empty protection, with that Dolphins alignment, that middle linebacker, in essence, he could run through. And if he runs through, that's going to be an adjustment on the offensive line. It's actually very difficult, but whatever side he goes to, typically the offensive line has a most dangerous man type of rule, where in this case, say he went to the offense's right, the right guard in this case would pick up the middle linebacker as he runs through, and then the right tackle would then block down on that defensive tackle, and the quarterback would throw off of that stand-up rusher on the right. So empty protection, it's a way for the offense to try to cheat the pressures and get the ball out in a hurry.
Yep. So let's close with one more. And here's Dallas. And one of the things that I'll call out here is, we talked about the best defensive players and how your technique changed. what did you do against the fastest defenders? Because here, Micah Parsons is the right defensive end.
Yeah.
Um, when you're lined up, say you were at tackle, I know you played most of your career at guard, but when you're facing somebody who's incredibly fast, how does that change your technique?
Well, you're hoping from a game plan standpoint, you'll have some draw plays in there, maybe a couple screens because these guys are just flying up and down the field. But then also it's trusting your technique, which can be very difficult at times, especially in a high stress situation. But realizing that ultimately that player, regardless of how fast they are, they have to get to a certain point. And if you make them run the long way around the field, you have to trust that everyone else is doing their job and that that pocket integrity in the interior, in this case, is strong and that the quarterback will be able to step up and deliver the ball. I think the faster the player is, the worst thing you can do is allow them to beat you inside. So in this
Another,
case, oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, another defensive stunt from out of empty, right? You have these two guys go in, and then 55 for Dallas starts on the center, but then he's going to loop around.
Yeah, yeah. So this is a way to have five potential rushers. Basically, how can we, one, isolate the left side because those are the Cowboys' two strongest individual pass rushers, but then also tie up the right side with twists and test their communication skills. So Cincinnati, due to the scheme, did a great job of getting the ball out quickly, first and foremost, but then also outside of the left guard here, did a pretty good job of trying to get in the way of a very difficult pass protection. But you can see how quickly they get there.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, this is another good example of the quarterback just makes a big difference here. He hangs onto the ball and waits and waits and waits for, somebody else to get open or doesn't see the receiver crossing right away. He's running for his life.
Right. But once again, in that empty protection, you're going to get twists. You're going to get all kinds of
Yep.
craziness there to stretch the offensive line's play in terms of that pocket integrity. You see, it's not a clean pocket at all, but the wide receiver and the quarterback makes everything correct on this play.
Yep. Yep. And I think even just the idea of identifying some of those defensive weird schemes, and that's not typical in NFL data where you would say, all right, on this play, Dallas did this, defensive game. So I think that's, even without getting into, was it a good play? Was it a bad play? Just the identification of it, is one of the things that you could get from this data.
Yeah, I think that the key thing here, just in general, is that there are only so many ways to line up generally and so many ways to block people in terms of a scheme, but you're able to add little wrinkles here and there to accentuate your strongest players on defense or your strongest players on offense, or be able to provide help for those who might need it on the offensive line play, or from a linebacker on running back situation. So every game plan is different, but there are general rules that kind of set the basis for everything, and then you adjust off of that based off of personnel.